Hey everyone, so this is a Q&A video where I answer some of the lingering questions that were left around the war in Ukraine. And we start by talking about the Elon Musk drama that happened yesterday and is apparently still somewhat ongoing. I'm gonna just switch it here. So, and if you can see, so Elon decided that it's time to discuss how this conflict of Russia and Ukraine can be ended. And I'm hoping most of my audience already see where the problem is. And the problem is very, very simple. Russia invaded a country that did not threaten it in the slightest. It was a land grab, it was an aggressive war, it was anti-democratic, fascist, yada, 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 yada. There's a lot of reasons why it is. But why is his proposal bad? Well, firstly, his proposal is justifying that it is okay to invade other countries. That he says like, oh, it's a viable way if you want to start, discussion about what people should do in those countries is just to invade them, which is, let's just put it, unhealthy as in a mild term. And then he talks about the potential elections under UN supervision. Firstly, UN has shown itself to be completely incompetent. Like, UN is not an organization we should be considering right now. UN is an organization when one of the founding members of the organization that has a veto power is actively waging an aggressive war, is annexing territories and committing genocide. What credibility do you want it to have? I know it was basically like a talking platform, but let it stay as a talking platform. Then don't just put, oh, it's going to be supervised by the UN. No, if you want something to be supervised, it needs to have some kind of authority. If the organization has no authority and no credibility, what are we talking about? So this UN needs to be reformed before it can do anything going forward. Anything. Right now is a talking platform. I agree, fine, let it be a talking platform. If it's going to start making decisions about shit, there needs to be a lot of reforms done. Now, I have a counter proposal to what Elon is saying. So Russia gets the fuck out. Russia pays reparations for all the suffering and murders that they did, because that's the least that they can do. They are also publicly stating they're sorry, and then they can start slowly but surely returning to the civilized world. Especially, obviously, here Elon talks about Crimea formerly being part of Russia. Well, I mean, that is an argument that stands completely no ground, because then we're going to get into a weird discussion of whom did the land belong to in this year or this year or this year. You know what this led to? This led to multiple centuries of bloodshed that we had in Europe. You know how we overcame it? We said that, okay, these are the borders and we respect them. That's it. That is how we overcame the bloodshed in Europe. There is no going back to the politics of, yes, but it did belong to some other nation. Moreover, in 1783, Russia did not exist. Russia did not exist, like the Russian Federation of today did not exist. Russian state that is right now operating in a territory of what we know as Russia and internationally recognized borders of Russia has been born in 1991. So it's a very, very young state. Before it was the Soviet Union, which was importantly not Russia. And whenever, for example, like someone states this argument, for example, oh, NATO and Russia have discussed about not encroaching even one step east or some shit like this. I'm not going to address this topic. It's a long topic. But the point is, the negotiations was between the Soviet Union, even before talking that it was never promised or it was never put in any kind of negotiation position or anything. But just by the fact itself, that one of the parties that was negotiating does not exist anymore. Russia is not the Soviet Union. It never was. So we need to understand that also Ukraine remains neutral. Fuck you, Ukraine remains neutral. Ukraine has earned every single right to do whatever it takes. Ukraine decides its own future, how it will rule its land and people of Ukraine decide what they want to do, where they want to go, who they want to join up with, and so on. They are dying and fighting not because they want to be neutral or have Mr. Billionaire here tell them what to do, but because they want to have their own democratically selected future and the way that they want to live. And that's something for us all to be considered about. Whenever you say that a country or people of that country cannot democratically select what they want their country to look like, who are you then? What will, in your opinion, what will EU gain when Ukraine becomes a member? Nan Bui is asking. That is very simple. So firstly, Ukraine is a prime place for investment. We know that every post-war country is basically a place of booming growth. Like basically, Ukraine right now is going to be a blank slate, like a tabula rasa. So they will be able to essentially do anything from it, like build any kind of new proprietorship. Like it's usually around these situations is when freshly made millionaires and billionaires are during the periods of post-war. So that's first part. It's a prime land for investment and growth, which EU has struggled a lot, to find in EU where the European Union can invest so we can get returns on those investments. And Ukraine will be prime, especially because it's such a large market. It is huge market for the European Union. So it's going to boost a lot of the growth within the EU because the production will need to be increased, new companies will sprout, and so on. Secondly, Ukraine is very, very rich in resources. A lot of, for example, natural gas. Like even some people that don't know anything about the history between Russia and Ukraine or don't understand Russians were even claiming that Putin started this war because he wants to take over the gas fields within Ukraine. Because the gas fields that are within Ukraine are so large and they can literally solve all the problems European Union has had. One of the biggest issues of European Union independency is that Europe that by itself does not have that big of a supplies of oil and gas. It needs to import those resources from the outside. Having Ukraine in can solve those issues basically with a wimp, because the system of transport from from Ukraine to Europe already exists. So the only thing that needs to be done is that those gas fields need to be developed, and then the infrastructure needs to be built to connect to already existing network of delivery to Europe. It is magnificent what the possibilities will be and how fast they can pay off for the European Union with Ukraine coming into them. And obviously, Ukraine now is also the biggest and most capable military in the EU, so that will just bring the European army capacity to a whole new level. If before we were safe, now we're going to be safe, safe, safe. Tara Jones asks, is there some way to get information or the future about someone in Lysychansk? She's loved and missed by many around the world. No one has heard since August 22nd. Please, can you help? I only speak English. Tara, I don't have any connections in the Russian-occupied Lysychansk. You should reach out to the Ukrainian embassy or maybe some kind of charity foundations that maybe have some connections. YouTube watcher asking, is the priority in Kherson securing dam and blocking escape route or moving in from multiple directions to build encirclement? I think what Ukraine is really looking forward is to get towards the escape route because what happens is we see that once the escape route is being endangered to be cut, that's when the Russians start really panicking. That's when they start like, well, maybe we should consider leaving. James Welsh asking, I'm guessing Russia lost its satellite live feeds early in the war. Any insights info how it was done, mate? I think Russian satellites were just shit. You're overestimating what Russian capabilities are. What type of electronic warfare equipment do you think Ukraine is using, or do they need? Any Russians have just really bad communications? Both. Russia have really bad communications equipment, as we saw in the first stages of the war, and Ukraine was able to capture a lot of the the representatives from those equipment. And then what kind of warfare they're using, I think it was aligned with their NATO allies. So they got exactly the things that needed to jam Russian communications. I'm not sure which one. I'm not a weapons expert. You should ask some of the other channels. How much of Russian professional army is left? I've heard estimates that, roughly speaking, it was about like about 40% of the Russian professional army is not battle capable anymore. So I've heard those estimates from the experts. British geohistorian asks, what is Ukraine's Kherson strategy? Get the Russians out. Michael McGuire asking, how are collaborators affecting the war effort? Collaborators is a problem for the inner cities of Ukraine because there's about, like up to 5% sliver of population that are still really want Russians in, doesn't matter what kind of war crimes they commit. So the biggest problem is that they're coordinating missile strikes against the Ukrainian targets. Again, they are also sending intelligence to the Russian forces. The good news is that intelligence doesn't make it always to the Russian high command. So that's the nice thing. And then you also mentioned here what's going to happen when Ukraine is going to push into the more occupied territories. We need to understand the density of these territories have been reduced significantly over the 8 years that Russia was in control there. And the argument changed significantly once Ukraine got attacked. I see a lot of the people reporting that even on the previously occupied territories, there are now more pro-Ukrainian sentiments. People didn't took lightly of their men being taken away. I think that there is a chance that there will not be any kind of strong resistance, even in long, lengthy occupied territories such as Luhansk or Donetsk. Why Ukraine keep letting Russia retreat from cauldrons and encirclements? Because war is hard. Emil Kosman is asking, any info on End-Lease? It apparently started operating from 1st of October. Again, I'm skeptical how much value it's going to provide. Most of what Lend-Lease does is reducing red tape, and so far we haven't seen any specific referring to Lend-Lease notifications about weapons and equipment deliveries. So again, when I see it, I believe it. How is Ukrainian armed forces preparing for possible tactical nuke? Do soldiers have iodine pills, etc.? I think they want to kill Russians before they are able to use tactical nukes. That's the strategy right now. What do you think China and India's position will be if Putin uses nukes? Very tough. Is Ukrainian armed forces receiving or have received cold weather gear? Yes, European Union said they're going to send hundreds of thousands cold weather gear. Do you think the overall Ukrainian armed forces strategy, how is to capture as much as possible, cut as many Russian supply routes, and hope that when winter fully sets in, the cold-hungry Russians will give up or at least be weak enough to be destroyed? I think Ukrainian strategy is to kill Russians when they can and as much as they can. We need to understand that Russia still has significant advantage in equipment. Ukraine is doing wonders of their military strategy with limited capabilities of resources that are having. Ukraine for a longer time had an advantage in manpower and qualified manpower, but they had no equipment. The equipment that was sent from the West is completely insufficient in quantities. Russia is having a lot of shit. We need to remember that always. Always, 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 always. There is always double, triple the shit that Russia has than Ukraine will ever have. Well, unless the supplies from the Western partners, IG, Lend-Lease, starts working properly. What are the chances that Russia will blow up Novokakhovka Dam when the Ukraine retakes Kherson, similar to what they did in Kryvyi Rih? It is possible. It is possible, but this will obviously be considered essentially a weapon of mass destruction. It's the same scale as using chemical, nuclear weapons and so on. It's a war crime on a scale that is unfathomable. It's very, very bad for any kind of Russian diplomatic efforts, if there is even any left.